this region. We've got this huge organization and operation, and then in a minute, we've had to sort of flip it to an online environment with 21,000 very different students, different families, working through different aspects of dealing with this crisis, with their own health issues, with their own job losses, with their own housing challenges. So when you look at all of that, boy, is this a time for compassion, right? For all of us, and to sort of ground ourselves in that. When I think about leading with compassion, and this is not something just today, you know, this is how do we lead with compassion normally, that then sort of helps equip us for this moment today to make this shift, that in 2 weeks' time, we were able to get all of our students learning online at home. And we launched that just yesterday, that our teachers are now instructing every day with our students, because we are a one-to-one district. So when I think about compassion, and this is a fundamental part of who we are and who I am as a leader, I think about it kind of in 3 different ways. That when you think compassion, you know, what does that mean? That isn't a place of kind of pity. That isn't a place of, oh, let me, you know, come from my place on high as a leader in this community and try to, you know, understand from a different place. Compassion really is joining in and understanding and humbling yourself in that relationship to understand another person's perspective. So when you think about that on a day-to-day, you know, kind of way, then understanding, we have to understand our students. We have to understand all of the different living arrangements and dynamics of our families. And we have to create opportunities that we can do that. So me personally, the things that I do are make sure that we have those voices heard, like our student voices. We have student board members. And so the students are there with us, helping making decisions all the time. And then when you have that, and when you go into this kind of crisis moment, that doesn't stop. I have to be able to understand where everybody is in this moment, including our staff. Every decision we had to make decisions about how are we going to take attendance with 21,000 students at home? How are we going to grade? I brought 40 teachers together in a Zoom kind of situation just like this, and heard all of their voices to make sure that I'm hearing their concerns, hearing their ideas, and, you know, kind of humbling myself in that relationship to make sure that I can understand. We had to set up and make sure that every policy fit the understanding of who are, what our families were dealing with right now. We have some families with many healthcare workers, and we had to make sure that any policy that we put in place was flexible enough that if a family was dealing with their own health crisis, that they could adapt to that. So as a leader, when you're sitting in this place, and I'm actually at work today, but if you're sitting in this place, making sure that you are finding that compassion instead of just establishing policies, letting that compassion of understanding all the circumstances, including with my teachers. I couldn't assume that every teacher had a perfect environment to go home and teach from. You know, they have children at home, they have spouses at home, they have sick relatives sometimes at home. So we also had to think through that. The other pieces of compassion that I think of is, the second thing is just being able to find the connection that we have with people. You know, what is that connection? And not just understand, but where do we have that common relationship? I don't know if you all know about Akron Family Restaurant. Do you all know what it serves in this community? This is the place where everyone goes to connect and have a relationship. But my theory is that we connect with people in a way to understand, but you have to find the great connections that you can have with each other. I just had an email from a teacher who on Sunday night, she was so concerned because her mother passed away in Columbus. And here she is grieving, but she was so worried about her kids the next day as we were launching online learning that she wanted to make sure that I knew this was happening and that she was going to drive to Columbus where her family was and still stay online with her kids because she couldn't help thinking that they would not have her with them on Monday. And in that moment, I could have just said, don't worry about it, put it in absence. But as a leader, when you come from a place of compassion, I connected with her in a big way to be able to say, I talked about my mother is in my house, 91-year-old mother, and we had this amazing exchange at about midnight on Sunday night before teachers were teaching, because I took the time to connect with her and to find a way to connect with her and share my own concerns during this time. And this woman isn't going to be able to have a funeral right now and all of that that goes with it. And here she is worried about her kids. That's what's mind-boggling. And then just the last thing that I think about in terms of compassion is not, you can't get so wrapped up in the ills and the woes of that, of all of the stress. You do have to have a balance in your own life to be able to do that, and to be able to make decisions and move forward. Just sitting in that understanding or sitting in sometimes the sorrow of the moment doesn't enable you to act. You can't just sit with it. You've got to be in a place that you can actually act on that compassion to make decisions and to move forward. So being able to feel that compassion, but not so deeply that it disables you and enables, kind of shuts you down, but that we can all sit together and understand, but then move forward and make decisions as we go on. So I'll pause for a second there just on those three.
Excellent. Thank you, Ellen. And I think the question that kind of comes along with that then is, you talk about finding that balance.
Yeah.
Kind of how are you, there's this whole idea, and I think John and Chris will talk about that a little bit later, but this whole idea of self-compassion. How are you taking care of yourself right now in the midst of everything else going on?
Yeah. So as you think about, that the three things that I just talked about really trying to make sure you're understanding, and I think it's really important to know that if you lead from this place of compassion, always, it does position you well for these kind of moments because you have those relationships, you have the ability for everyone is truly feeling heard already. So when you come into a moment like this, you can sort of ride those relationships through a huge transition, including some very tough decisions that we'll all be making, over these next few months as leaders. And so within that, taking care of yourself, you have to be able to do that. And it is the hardest thing for us as leaders. The other day I went home, it was in the middle of last week, and I was talking to my 91-year-old mother lives with me and my spouse, and we were talking at dinner, and I just started crying. I said, I am so worried about my children, my kids, not my 2 adult children, but my 21,000 students here. I'm so worried about what's happening with their life and their safety, and are they, hungry at night? Is the food that we're providing, we've already provided 100,000 meals so far, but is that enough? Do we have enough on the weekends? And so it just kind of overtook me at that moment because of all the decisions that we were having to make and my fear and worry. But at the same time, you know, you definitely have to have those outlets to be able to share those concerns and fears. But that is a difference between, you know, feeling compassion and making sure that you're creating opportunities so that you understand, you know, in the what I do at a leadership level, for me to make sure that I understand youth today, I create an opportunity, a lot of student leadership opportunities that I'm around, but I also run a youth group through my church so that I am deeply involved with 35 kids every single week so that I can understand children and youth today, and then that helps me. So those opportunities to be able to be open and share your own concerns and fears, but then also not to get so deeply, you know, almost enmeshed in those concerns where you go beyond compassion and then you're almost unable, you can't go that far. So as long as I feel like, as long as I always have the outlets that I can cry at home at my dinner table if I have to, and then I come back the next day and I can deeply understand what's happening, but I can't let that overtake my decision making, because we've got to move forward and be able to provide the supports and the routines that our students need every day.
Ellen, you've shared some examples of when you've shown compassion to others, and just the example of the teacher who just lost her mother. Can you share any example of when someone has shown tremendous compassion to you, and if that's impacted the way that you lead today?
You know, I think when we oftentimes think of compassion and leading from compassion, we sort of think of these amazing, heroic people and heroic events that you see on TV where, you know, people are going and feeding everybody in the firehouse, and it's just amazing, like these big things. My real fundamental belief is that the true leadership comes from more of that quieter, more humble place of showing that compassion. And the times, it's the small things, the times in my life, even this past 2 weeks where we've been, you know, all of my staff have been working 16 to 18-hour days, just trying to get everything flipped from a brick and mortar district to an online district in 2 weeks' time. The moments of compassion that almost brought me to my knees was the simple text from someone that said, "Hey, how are you doing?" You know, I'm the one who's always typically reaching out to people, connecting with them, making sure they're okay, checking in. And then to have one of my staff members, and there's 2 in particular that are just masterful at this, that they see me. Okay, they see me. And it's that presence with others that I try to do every day, and that what resonates with me when I go into a room. And so especially now, there's so many people that are distracted by either their cell phones or distracted or just very kind of superficial interactions. When you can find to be present with people and to truly kind of, you know, we tell teachers the best teachers in the world are the ones where the students are talking 80% of the time and teachers are talking 20% of the time. You think about that. I bet teachers you had, those were your favorite classes, where the kids spoke 80% and the teachers 20%. I kind of think about that in our own lives as leaders, the same thing. If you come into a relationship and you're talking 20% of the time and engaging with somebody out of that curious place and wanting to understand who they are and what they're all about. So the best moments these past 2 weeks have been those small little texts where people asked me, they saw me in meetings, They might have seen that I looked, maybe worn down or stressed, and they were reaching out to me asking if I was okay, how are things going, how are my kids, how's my mother. Those are the special moments. It's those little things.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Ellen.
So Ellen, kind of
Jeremy, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll kind of transition the last question, but I think it's really a great segue from just that idea of leading with presence and that connection. And I love just that idea of, we don't just flip a switch and have these things, but you're building upon the trust and the relationships that have happened. But those small acts, small compassionate acts. And so I guess our last question is, what are some compassionate acts or actions that people can take to support you, to support, the administration and the teachers, and most importantly, I know you would agree, the students and their families right now. So what are some ways people can get involved?
So forget those little texts that I was just talking about. No, I'm just kidding. But I need something big right now. I need a big, and there's really multiple ways that people can support our kids right now. The United Way has started a fund with some of our major funding leaders in the city, and it's an emergency fund, and that they are in partnership with us. Okay. So if anyone wants to step up just financially or talk to your companies and your organizations to donate, that comes back around to support our students and families. And that's supporting their basic needs, additional, even though we are feeding 10 to 15,000 students a day, and we decided this is another great example of leading from a place of compassion, that we decided not to just feed our Akron Public School students. And this was a choice. We didn't have to do this. We could have easily said, let's just take care of our own kids. But in our district, when you lead from compassion, you say, we don't care if it's a private school student or a charter school student. We don't care if they're homeschooled. We want to feed anybody that walks to any one of our schools every single day. And we're feeding kids all the way down to the age of 1. So we are taking care of all of the children. But the United Way Fund also is helping with some of the weekend food needs, and I'm sure what you heard from the food bank last week, all of those funds are going to help our families. We are a 1-to-1 district computer-wise, and all of our curriculum is digital. So we are able to go online in 2 weeks' time, which is wonderful. We do have some families, though, that don't have the internet access. And that's one of the things that we're trying to mobilize the community through the city and through United Way's help to support. We could, if a company wanted to adopt a school, to be able to purchase hotspots for students so that they can get them in their home. If anybody has connections with the major internet providers, our families are having some barriers where they're 12-month plans instead. Some of the providers are offering free service, but not just for the 2 or 3 months they need it right now, and families can't afford it afterwards. Yeah. So there's some barriers to some of the internet free that's out there that we're trying to negotiate with some of those companies. So if anybody has connections to convince, right now we just need, we need to make sure that 100% of our students have internet access. That's the most important thing for us right now. And then United Way's fund. We also do have an opportunity for some attendance incentives on a smaller scale, that we are doing some engagement strategies with our kids. And if anybody would want to donate even just gift cards and things like that, some smaller scale things, Carla Chapman, who's our Director of Community Relations, you just go on our website and look up Community Relations, and there's a contact, and we can get you connected there too, or you could reach out to me.
Great. Well, Ellen, thank you so very much. Clearly, as everyone can tell, the right person to be sharing on this topic. And so we're just so grateful for you and for all whom you represent and for all the good that you're doing. And hopefully people can find ways, and we'll make sure we post those on the resource pages as well, of ways to get involved and stay supporting that work. So you can be at your very best doing what you do to continue to support all those involved. So thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you.
Sure, my pleasure.
Thanks, Ellen.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Now what we're going to do, and from a time standpoint, we'll just allow people, if you need to drop off, feel free to do so. But Dr. Chris Williams and Dr. John Roper are just going to walk us through a few reflections and simple tools that we can kind of incorporate for ourselves to remain compassionate as leaders. We heard so many great things from Dr. McWilliams-Woods, and just want to have a few opportunities for us to think about ways that we can continue to exercise those things as well. So I'm going to unmute Chris and John here, and they're going to lead us through a couple of things.
Thanks, Jeremy, and especially thanks to Ellen. Really, the remarks that she made and the deep, profound kind of thinking that she brought forth for me really fits in with what we want to talk about in just the next few minutes. We're trying to get a look now at, we heard from Ellen, let's take a look at ourselves to explore a bit more deeply about our own leadership experiences with compassion, for we each have our own stories. And now more than ever, it's important for us to acknowledge these stories within us and to call upon others to share their stories as well. For it is in this space that our connections as humans come to life. So before we talk just a teeny bit about what the quote experts have to say about compassion, let's take just a few seconds to pause, take a purposeful pause, and to ask ourselves 3 important questions. And I'm introducing them to you right now, but they're also found on our website on the resource page, so you can reflect further on these questions if you want to when this session is over. So the first question, kind of take a deep breath here. And the first question to ask ourselves is, what does compassionate leadership mean to me? And how highly do I value compassion as a leader? And to better answer this question, you might think of the times when someone demonstrated compassion to you, or you felt compassion for others, and what that experience was like. The second question is, what are my concerns about being compassionate? And Ellen really raised these to the forefront. Are there boundaries to compassion? If I'm too compassionate, am I considered weak? If I'm too compassionate, do I get too caught up in the emotions and I can't do what work needs to be done right now at this point in time? And it's so important that we acknowledge what we're feeling about this, because once we can acknowledge those thoughts and feelings, then we can move to a more creative part of our brain and we can problem solve a lot better. The third question, though, that we want to ask is, how can I best demonstrate compassionate leadership for others, and as Ellen said, as well as myself? There are no right or wrong answers. The important thing is to raise our awareness so we're more able to make intentional choices about how we authentically embody and demonstrate compassion as a leader. Compassionate leadership as a construct is nothing new. It's been around for the last 30 years. There's been a lot of research articles on it. And what comes to the forefront is being a compassionate leadership is good business. But equally important, and we find this at this point in time, is it helps bring meaning and connection to the workplace, especially when people are anxious or in the midst of uncertainty. A Forbes magazine article, and I love this title, Compassionate Leadership, a Mindful Call to Lead from Both Head and Heart. And this is right on with what Ellen said. They said, compassionate leadership begins with the intention to see as others see and feel as others feel. And it's also about having the ability to relate and to connect with people for the purpose of inspiring and empowering others. And there are so many different ways we can demonstrate compassionate leadership, but the key is finding what authentically suits our leadership style along with the needs of those people that we serve. One final thing that I want to mention that's so important for all of us, and this is this aspect of self-compassion, which just really means being kind to ourselves. A Harvard Business Review article that was called "Give Yourself a Break, the Power of Self-Compassion" gives 3 ideas that we can think about when we find that we're in a funk. Once again, so many leaders can be compassionate to others, but when we come to ourselves, we're kind of without mercy. So the idea is, think about these 3 questions to kind of help us move to another place. And these 3 questions are, am I being kind to myself? In other words, am I treating myself as kindly as I would treat others? Am I acknowledging shortcomings and failings as experiences shared by everyone, so I'm not the only one? And am I keeping my negative feelings in perspective? So those are some things you might want to try. Right now, I'm going to turn it over to John to talk further about the specific components of compassion and ways we can nurture our own capacity for kindness. Okay, John?
Thank you, Chris. Thanks everyone for being here. It's good to be with you. And thanks, Ellen. You prefaced what I want to say very beautifully. To continue with the theme of compassion, my time, I want to spend a few minutes talking about the neuroscience of compassion, and also talking a lot about the relationship between compassion and empathy. And Ellen did this implicitly very well. We know that when a person is in distress, feeling strongly, agitation, resentment, fear, worry, anxiety, we know that that midbrain, as I talked about briefly last week, our midbrains light up. That circuitry in the midbrain informs us and resonates with the feeling of distress. We also know that when I, as an individual, observe another person in distress, that same neural circuitry lights up in my brain. So that resonates. There's a neurochemical resonance between the person in distress's experience and my experience. So I have that same feeling resonate with me. And that's what empathy is in terms of the neurobiology of all of that. But we also know that empathy can be draining. It can deplete us to constantly experience the distress of others and to carry that with us can really compromise our own sense of well-being. You might have heard the term compassion fatigue with regards to caretakers or people in the helping professions. And it's really not compassion fatigue, but it's more accurately empathy fatigue, because we can only sustain that level, again, of resonant distress for a given period of time before we ourselves are compromised. When we can move, though, from empathy, that feeling with the other person, to a place of compassion, feeling for the other person. When we experience compassion and hold the other as separate, an entirely different part of our brain lights up, different neurocircuitry. And it's the same circuitry that fires when we experience warmth and intimacy, family, connection, the love of a mother for her child. This is feel-good stuff, and it's actually life-giving as opposed to depleting. But we have to be able to access that compassion and move out of that space of empathy. So when you really look at it, our brains, we are rewarded for being loving. So we're primed for love, just as beings, we are primed to be loving. But we can practice finding a space and nurturing our compassion by practicing a specific form of meditation, and that's called loving kindness meditation. So I want to introduce that now and just spend maybe 2 minutes relaxing, breathing, again, as we talked last week, deep breathing, and just if you can find a space to settle in and take a deep breath, allowing your stomach to rise with a deep inhale and to fall. Perhaps allowing your eyes to close or to move to a soft gaze. Another deep inhale. Find a space for calm. And now I want you to imagine that you're 1,000 miles out in space and you're looking down at the Earth. This beautiful blue-green ball. Now you see millions and millions of people, many of them in distress at this time, members of our community, perhaps members of your family or yourself. Hold this world community with love and kindness. And just follow my words. May we know healing and strength in a time of challenge. May we find comfort and calm in the face of worry and fear. May we live with peace and find joy in the small things. Again, may we know healing and strength in a time of challenge. May we find comfort and calm in the face of worry and fear. May we live with peace and find joy in the small things. May we know healing and strength in a time of challenge. May we find comfort and calm in the face of worry and fear. May we live with peace and find joy in the small things. Now return to your own experience of the moment, your breath, and your body. Understand your own distress and your own story. And just for a moment, follow my words. May I know health and strength. May I find comfort and calm. May I live with peace and joy. May I know health and strength. May I find comfort and calm. May I live with peace and joy. May I know health and strength. May I find comfort and calm. May I live with peace and joy. Allow yourself one more moment of stillness, and then slowly return to the space you're in. That was a very brief experience, just a small taste. We have the resources for loving kindness meditation. Those are words that I fashioned myself for my own morning meditation time. So you can find words that are comfortable for you, but please refer to the resources. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Jeremy.
And I'll turn it over to Barry.
Okay, great. Thank you, John. Thank you very much, Chris. We're going to do a little experiment here. We're going to put you into breakouts virtually and pair you up with just a couple other people. And if you want to share any thoughts from what Ellen shared, from any of the thoughts that Chris and John shared, or just to connect with someone else and share any thoughts you have on compassion, we'll do that just for a couple minutes, then we'll bring everybody back together again. So Jeremy, I think you're going to push the button and split us up here. Is that right?
That is correct. And I see folks dropping off. So just a reminder, we'll be back next Wednesday with Perry Clark from Truly Reaching You, sharing about leading with perseverance. So if you're dropping off, we hope to see you again next week. And then, yeah, the breakout groups, just a simple reflection of, what did you hear today that most resonated with you and why? And how are you demonstrating compassion to yourself and others? So if you're able to hang around, we'll send you in your groups for a few minutes here and check back with you momentarily.